Hello everyone, in this video we'll be solving problem 1957, delete characters to make a fancy string. The problem statement is, we are given a string S, we need to delete minimum possible number of characters from S to make it fancy. For a string to be a fancy string, there should not be 3 consecutive characters that are equal. If we look at example number 1, this is not a fancy string because we have 3 E's in it consecutively. So after removing one of these E's, we get a fancy string which becomes our output. Similarly, in example number 2, there are 2 occurrences which makes this string not a fancy string. But if the string is already fancy, that it does not have 3 consecutive characters which are same, we don't need to remove any characters, just return it as is. This is a very easy problem to solve and there are multiple approaches to solve it. Let's switch to whiteboard and discuss them quickly. As we need to delete the characters to make sure that the input string is a fancy string, the simplest way to solve this problem is to use a pointer that will be pointing at the current character and compare its value with the characters right before it, that is at I-1 and I-2. And if the value of s of I is equal to the value at s-1 and s-2, it means there are a total of 3 characters that are equal, which makes it a non-fancy string. And once we have identified that the corresponding character makes it a non-fancy string, we can simply ignore it while building our output. Let's do a quick dry run to understand this approach. As we are going to be doing the lookup with I-2 position, I'll start this dry run with I is equals to 2. This is to avoid getting index out of bounds error. So with I is equals to 2, S of I is going to be pointing at this E, and S of I-1 is also E, which is this position, while S of I-2 is L. As S of I do not match both S of I-1 and I-2, this is still a fancy string. So we'll increment I by 1. This time S of I is pointing at E but at position 3. While S of I-1 is also pointing at E at position 2, while S of I-2 is also pointing at E at position 1. As S of I is equal to both S of I-1 and I-2, we cannot include S of I in our output as it will make the output a non-fancy string. Similarly, we'll continue the iteration for the remaining characters in the string by incrementing the I pointer and compare it with the last values that were added to our output. Although I have used I-1 and I-2 in this example, in the implementation, we'll be looking at the last 2 characters that were added to the output variable. With this solution, our time complexity is O of n, where n is the number of characters in the input string. This is because we are running an iteration on all of the characters given to us, while the space complexity is also O of n because we are building this output on the fly with all of the characters to make sure it is a fancy string. If we ignore the memory needed to store the output, the space complexity of this approach is O of 1 as we are not using any additional memory for processing. I hope you are able to understand this explanation. Let me show you how we can implement this using Python. In this Python implementation, I've created a variable answer which is of type array and then starting a for loop to iterate through all the characters in the string s. Inside the loop, I am checking if the length of the answer is less than 2 or the value of the current character do not match to the either of the last 2 elements that were added to the answers variable. If any of the conditions are true, it implies that adding C to the output variable will still make it a fancy string. Hence, I am appending C to the answers array and continuing with the loop. After the for loop is complete, using the join operation, I am converting the array into a string. This code when submitted on LeetCode beats nearly 52% of the submissions in terms of runtime and nearly 26% in terms of memory. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you are able to understand the explanation. The details to access the source code is available in the description below. Feel free to check that out and I will see you in the next one. Thank you.